Welcome back to Preacher Handshake. I'm Evan.
And I'm Hannah, and we're your hosts.
And this week on Preacher Handshake, we talk with Reverend Timothy Peoples.
Timothy became Wilshire Baptist Church's senior pastor in January 2023 after serving 5 years as senior minister at Emerywood Baptist Church in High Point, North Carolina. He was a pastoral resident at Wilshire from 2015 to 2017.
A native of Jones, Oklahoma, Timothy received a BA in Religious Studies from Adrian College in Adrian, Michigan, a Master of Divinity degree from Yale University School of Divinity, and a Doctor of Ministry from Emory University's Candler School of Theology. The focus of his doctoral work was biblical interpretation and proclamation, and his dissertation was titled The Perceived Ethos and Its Effect on Rhetoric and Relationship. Timothy's married to Valerie Lott, and they have two amazing Old English Sheepdogs, Frankie and Cardozo.
Timothy is such a preacher that I admire. I've admired from afar for a while, and getting to hear such a powerful sermon and then talk about his process and the things that he is really thinking through as he preaches was really powerful. I found, it kind of fun to hear this seasoned preacher say that he always gets nervous. It's just kind of like a gift to be like, oh, he's taking this so seriously and he still really, really cares about this. And I think he's also one of those that sees preaching as like pastoral care in a lot of ways, and I think you hear that in just the way he's thinking through his sermon movements and in his preaching. So I really enjoyed talking with him.
Yeah, I so appreciated this sermon, and I love the way that he really is like stepping into the moment where this is a very big day in the life of the history of the world and the life of his church. And he's stepping up to that and carrying all of that with him and is really clear, making the sermon so important in that moment. And because of that, I think, and the crafting and the way that he preaches and how great a sermon it is, it becomes really impactful for the lives of the people going forward as we hear about. And that was really encouraging to me.
As always, you can listen to Timothy's full sermon through the link in our show notes.
We hope you enjoy our conversation with Reverend Dr. Timothy Peoples. Well, welcome to the podcast, Timothy. We are so excited that you are here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, so one of the things that we ask all of our guests is, what's your relationship to preaching like? Have you always loved it, just discovered it? Is it a highlight of your pastoral work?
Yeah, I guess I would say that this is something that preaching is something that I've always loved. As a kid, I didn't play hide and seek or tag. I would invite my friends over and I built a pulpit in the backyard with pews and things, and I would make them sit outside and listen to me preach. And then some of them would play the music, some of them would do the dancing, all the different things. And so as a kid, I loved this idea of preaching. And then now, it's while it scares the crap out of me every Sunday to preach. But it is still something I find worthwhile and loving, and just a joyous time to get to do this and represent and share the spirit of the living God that is flowing through each of us. So a little bit of always something that I loved that it's turned into now scary, but also a joy in the same way.
So tell us about your congregation, your context for the sermon that we'll hear today. Who are they? What are they like?
My context is Wilshire Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. It is a predominantly white space church that I've been in for about 3 years now. Very justice centered, very justice and missional oriented. That is very big as an open and affirming congregation in the South that some may know us as the Ebola church, that when the Ebola crisis happened, that one of the only people that passed away from Ebola when coming to America, their spouse was a member here. And so our pastor at the time went over to the house and prayed with him and was with him through all of that, showing that this is not something that we need to hide from, but to actually be a part of. And so our church has always been one that is in the center of loving others and making sure that all are welcome in no matter what we're doing, whether that's going to protest, whether that is calling our legislators, being really involved in the justice centered moment.
Wow, what a legacy to inherit as a pastor.
Yes. Yes.
So, can you talk through a little bit of what your sermon prep process typically looks like?
Yeah. So we are mostly a lectionary based church, even. We're quite traditional in our worship. And so still we're not as high as Episcopalians, but we're somewhere close to that as Baptists in our ways a little bit. And so my sermon prep usually starts on Monday, going through the lectionary, deciding which scripture we'll be using throughout that next Sunday along with our worship planning team. And then sitting down with commentaries and other pieces to just really reading and going through. That's usually my Monday and Tuesday is a lot of reading. And then Thursday, I go to my favorite coffee shop. Thank God for Houndstooth Coffee in Dallas and Austin. I go to my favorite coffee shop and I sit there from 9 to 4 and just write and write and write, and then do some edits on Saturday. But then Sunday morning is where I say that right before I get up early, and really rehearse, go through the sermon over and over, get really affiliated with it, but also really. I leave the last 300 to 400 words open to the Spirit. And so I don't write those yet until that Sunday morning. And just really feeling where it is that the Spirit is leading me. So it's a weekly process of going through what the scripture is, what we're looking at, different illustrations, different readings, and then just where the Spirit is moving.
Can I ask about that last 400 words? That's really interesting to me. So those like when you say last, is that your close? Like how you land the
Yes.
plane, you kind of save till the very end. That's how does that go?
It makes the sermon process even scarier than what
Right? It sounds terrifying.
but usually the end of most of all of my sermons are just wherever the Spirit leads and just how that movement goes into. So yes, there are days where I'm like, all right, I don't know what it's going to be like until we get up there at 11:32, and and we'll see. But the Spirit always works, and I'm always grateful for it.
Wow.
Right.
Well, today we are looking at a sermon you preached at Wilshire on January 19th, 2025, and it's based on Isaiah 62, 1 through 4, titled Silence is a Dangerous Thing.
Yeah, and you begin this sermon by rooting us in history of the moment with 1967, and a moment in history where we find echoes of our moment and also the context that you're going to be referring to throughout the sermon. So I want to share a clip from that.
The year was 1967. The U.S. was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and many citizens wondered why troops were sent there and exactly why they were fighting. And this year, many black and brown individuals raised their voices, crying out to their country, dismayed on being sent away. It was this year, 1967, that you may remember Muhammad Ali was convicted for refusing to fight in the war, stating, why should they ask me to put on a uniform and go 10,000 miles away from home and drop bombs and bullets on brown people in Vietnam while so-called black people in America are treated like dogs. It was the same year, 1967, when Martin Luther King Jr. stood in the pulpit of Riverside Church and delivered one of his most memorable sermons, Beyond Vietnam, a time to break silence.
I can't help but hear echoes from scripture, moments that ground us in a moment, like Isaiah 6, the year that King Uzziah died, or Luke 1, in the days of King Herod. Tell us why you chose to begin your sermon with this invitation into a moment in our history.
Yeah, a big piece of that came from the Isaiah 62 passage itself. For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet. I think there's something so beautiful about that passage at the start of that, and then goes into until this happens, until this happens, until this happens, and over in this flowery language that happens. And this notion of silence took my mind into the movements in history that we have literally reminded ourselves that silence is complicit in evil among us. And the longer we commit to silence, the longer we're doing an injustice in the world and around us. And we ourselves are in a movement, and we can either choose to walk into that, or we can choose to stay silent and be complicit in that. And when we are silent, the injustice just digs deeper and deeper into the systems of our lives. And so these words that King does, this little trick in some way, this resounding of Isaiah's words of the detriment of silence from the Vietnam War. And so for me, where the sermon was moving to, it was a mandate for us to break the silence, break where what we're looking at, because this is the same thing that King does. So I kind of follow his path of what he does in his sermon in 1967.
I love your attention to time that you give throughout this, weaving kind of the past and then walking us through the narrative and weaving in Isaiah and then bringing us to the present. And this is something you do kind of throughout your sermon. And I'm just, curious as a pastor of a progressive church, how do you strike this balance in your preaching about being honest about injustice and speaking truth to power in some ways without really drifting into partisan politics or, alienating whole groups of people in your congregation who may believe differently?
Yeah, it's difficult. There are times when I've heard over and over people coming up to me and saying, this idea that Jesus wasn't political, and that's just not true, right? We have Jesus going up against an empire, speaking out against the oppressed, and those who have wronged the widows and the children, right? We have Jesus actually walking to Jerusalem. I mean, walking in Jerusalem, going to face his own death and sharing all of these words of saying, what is right and what is justice and how we should live. And so the thing of it is that while the gospel is political and will always be political, what it is not is partisan. And so we have to be very clear in that the church, the messages that we preach and share and do from the pulpit or from the floor, from the inside and the outside, that we are not being a partisan place of being. And that is hard because of the way that people may hear the sermon. We now have it where people, no matter what you're saying or no matter what's going on, they hear in the lens of Republican, Democrat, or Independent, because that's the newsreels every day, right? Something going on. And so it doesn't matter who's in the White House, it doesn't matter who's in the legislative. We have to be able to speak out against what is wrong, the situations of immigration. We have to be able to speak out for those, for our LGBTQI brothers and sisters and siblings. We have to be able to speak out and be honest with where we at, and noticing that sometimes people are going to hear it as political, but dadgummit, sometimes Jesus got political too, and that's okay. And so that's just part of the gospel. Um, and the other part of that is, you you hope to hold your congregation up to a standard in a way that you can't preach on every news headline or disruption that happens uh, in the world, but that they would know what to do when these disruptions and things happen, that they will know how to follow into the gospel life that Jesus has set before us, um, to do what's right and live into that justice.
It's so hopeful. And one of the things I love about this message as well is as you're helping us think about silence being complicity, and we think about that and we often then think, okay, so we've got to speak up. But there's another aspect to speaking up that emerges too, and it's the importance of sitting in lament and using our voices for lament, and you pull the evidence of the lament that we find in the third Isaiah after the pain of exile in a clip I'm going to share now.
The prophet Isaiah knows a little bit about what King is talking about, or should I say vice versa. Isaiah 62 finds itself in the placement of third Isaiah, Trito Isaiah, which is the third portion of the book of Isaiah, chapters 56 through 66. It's believed to be written by a different prophet than the other two portions. Whereas in second Isaiah, we find in the year of 539 that King Cyrus of Persia finally ends the exile. And it's in this same portion that God promises the people that they would not go back to normal, but to go back to something greater, to something better than what they had before. However, the reality of the people and the situation was not that. While some remained in Judah for all of their years of exile, others were taken away, sent to a new place. But the work of 50 to 60 years done by those in power could not be undone. This is why the people are filled with lament. And today we do not rush past it to go to the glory at the end of the passage, but we sit in the lament because far too often we rush past Good Friday to get to Easter morn. Far too often, we don't understand the pain within us, within our community, within our country, within our actual land that is happening. And we neglect when life feels like a desert and say, it'll just be fine. And sometimes we must sit in the place of lamentations and be honest with how we feel.
In my experience, and I think in a lot of our experience in the American church, lament is something that does not come easy. It's not something that we're taught very often. There's a lot of smile and keep going. This is not, we pretend like those feelings aren't real. So I'm curious how you foster a culture of lament in your context, in your congregation.
Part of it is that for so long, churches like mine and probably all churches from 50s and up, people came into church and put on these masks and said life is great, life is wonderful, and not going to show what is their deep secrets, what are the pains and pieces that they're going to. And now we're looking into a culture where it is driving us all insane and causing us piece by piece for that mask to fall off, and being able to say that I need to be in sanctuary, a safe place where I can be able to share what is going on in my life, the hardships that are happening. And part of that for me is being a vulnerable preacher. There was one Sunday when I preached a sermon about being bipolar, and I put all of my medications on the pulpit and began to share. This one makes me feel like this. This one is because of this situation. This one is when I'm on my highs, and this one is when I'm on my lows. Or being able to share what it was like growing up with a drug addicted parent and how that changed my life. And so we have to model that as those pieces of being able to be vulnerable from the pulpit, to model lament from the pulpit, to help people understand that it's okay to take off the mask, because we for so long made a culture of saying, you know what, just come into this place being happy. We're going to gossip about you if you share anything else, and we don't need that. And the church is changing in such good ways, and that we need to make sure the church is what it is, a holy and acceptable place where we can be able to say, let your burdens to God. And that's okay. That's just fine. And part of that too is I believe that my pastoral care informs my preaching. And so we can't lead or teach or preach without knowing and loving those in our pews. And so often we've confused just great preaching with great pastors, and that's not exactly true, right? We have to know our congregation and being there for their highs and lows and the disruptions and the joys and then the hardships, and in seeing that, being part of that change and part of that transformation, It's at the tables with people, is the handshakes and the hellos before worship starts, is the hospital visits that's sitting with them, it's the baby dedications and the baptisms. It is really getting to know them and to allow them to know we're here for you, and that whatever it is you're going through, we as clergy are walking this with you, and they are giving us an invitation. And so why not RSVP into their lives for such sacred moments like that? And so with knowing our congregation, it allows us in our preaching to be able to share and to say, I hear what you are going through. And while I may not know exactly what that's like, I hear is a word of truth that is a vulnerability. Here's a word that allows us to lament. Here's a word that allows us to take off our burdens and to share with our God. Here's a word for us today. And what are we doing to move into that word?
It really seems like you're trying to filter, pastoring through preaching, that it's not just like this separate event, that it really is working in tandem. And in some ways, if you're not attentive to the pastoral needs of your community, you're kind of also failing as a preacher in some ways.
Yeah, that's,
Yes.
that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, yeah, we really are. I just am so appreciative of how you have led with vulnerability, and we've seen that. I think I had a mentor, at one point say, I'm sure I've said this before, he's like, don't let them see you sweat,
Mm,
and in your preaching. And I found that that was really bad advice. That what the church needs, and the church is changing, like you said, to be more open to it. And I think as Baptist folks, as we are on this screen right now, the idea of the priesthood of every believer and this kind of freedom that we see in everyone, that we don't have to create this separation between clergy having everything perfect or something like that, but that we're
right.
people, right? And we model that. And so I'm thankful for how you model that. One of the other things I love about this sermon is you're playing with this idea of lament and how silence can be a problem, but you have to also acknowledge that solitude is a spiritual practice, that there is good silence, but we can't let solitude become an excuse for being silent when it matters. And so I want to share
Mm,
another clip.
We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. I recognize that silence is a self-discipline and solitude is an act that we must observe. But when it comes to injustice, silence is not the practice we must observe. For liberation to be obtained, we must speak and act and never procrastinate. And you must ask yourself, is our silence worth the lamentations and the hardships of others? Is your silence abandoning others because the injustice and harm and decrees of those in power do not affect you? There is danger in silence, a danger in removing ourselves from the equation, which the prophet realizes. It says, no more shall we let it be. I believe King understood the prophet when he said there comes a time when silence is betrayal. Our lives begin to end the day that we become silent about things that matter. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. May today you be the day that you say, I will not rest. I will not keep silent. I will not keep still.
What a word, what a gift. In what ways do you see your preaching as a way not only to use your voice to speak up for these, as you've described here, but to help others discover the power of their voices? How are you seeing preaching playing a role in that?
Back in the day, the Alvin Ailey studio would start their performances with a breathing exercise. And before you knew it, halfway through the performance, the audience was breathing alongside the same way, mimicking the dancers, not realizing that they were doing it. But it began to be uh, this way that they started and would flow throughout the entire performance. And I think there's something sad with that, that while it's not a whole mimicking or doing exactly the same thing, is that one of the ways that we as preaching, we start with a way of getting people to hear and hoping that while they're hearing, they're also understanding that their voice matters too in this. That is not that preaching itself is not an exercise of them just to come to listen, but there is a service for them to go out and do as well. And so by as using the piece of the clip that was just heard, that I hope that today you will say that I will not keep silent. I will hope today you will say that I will not keep still, is a push for them to also walk into this mandate, this action. And so for that, it is a piece of helping people discover their own voices by giving them language that they may not have had before, by giving them breathing exercises that they may not knew that they could be a part of and do as well. There's this whole thing in that that allows people to hear something, but also be part of doing something too that they did not know that they could probably be a part of. And I think that's a good place in preaching when we allow people to find their voice in that. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's helpful. It's great. I love the breathing exercise image. So you move in the sermon from Dr. King to Rabbi Joachim Prince's speech at the March on Washington, and I want to listen to that clip.
The year was 1963. He went up to the podium and stared out into the sea of people. Odetta had just sung "Oh Freedom," and the people were ready to go to hear Martin Luther King give a speech. But before he gives his speech, Rabbi Joachim Prince gets up to speak. Dr. Prince devoted much of his life to the civil rights movement. And while serving as president of American Jewish Congress, he represented the Jewish community as an organizer of the March on Washington, where he is now at the podium to speak. Finally, a hush comes over the sea of people. And he states, "When I was the rabbi of a Jewish community in Berlin under Hitler regime, I learned many things. The most important thing that I learned under those tragic circumstances was not that bigotry and hatred are the most urgent problem. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence. A great people in which had created a great civilization had become a nation of silent onlookers. They remained silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, in the face of mass murder. And America must not become a nation of onlookers. America must not remain silent. It must speak up and act, from the president down to the humblest of us, for the sake of the image, for the idea and the aspiration of America itself. Our children, yours and mine, in every school across the land each morning pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and the republic for which it stands. They, the children, speak fervently and innocently of this land as the land of liberty, justice for all. Liberty and justice for all.
Man, first, I love the way that you like poetically bring us. I mean, it feels like we're standing on the steps, ready to hear in this moment. And, we've talked in this podcast series, we've talked to a lot of preachers when we've asked, what sermon would you like to share? What sermon would you like to talk about? More than one has shared this particular Sunday on the eve of Inauguration Day. Tell us about how you decided to take the sermon here and how you felt it landed with your people on this particular moment in our history.
So you all know this when you stumble on a good illustration and you're just like, I want to use it so bad, but I don't know where to use it. And then finally the day comes, and you're like, oh yes, this is it. This is the time. This is what I had with this illustration of Rabbi Joachim Prince that I just stumbled on accidentally. And when I was doing some Google searches and I wanted something to connect with King, because if I remember, this is still the day right before MLK Day. And so it's MLK Day and Inauguration Day. And so I wanted something that still connected with that as we're leading into the next day of what all that meant and the weight and the heaviness of that. And so most of my congregation, I would say, would not have known Rabbi Joachim Prince. And I didn't know of him or this speech until, again, accidentally stumbling upon it. And it seemed that it worked so well with the timing of doing, at the beginning in 1967, we had the sermon in Vietnam, and then 1963, we're working a little bit backwards, but then we're going to get to the time of here we are in 2025, and what are we doing now? Are we still going to be listening to what the kids are saying for liberty and justice for all? Are we going to actually be participants in those words? And if so, then that means from the president all the way down that we all have to adhere to some verbiage. I should say, not just verbiage, but actions that will change all of our lives. And so I believe it landed well with my congregation, with them not knowing this, but actually you can actually hear some of them in the background as I'm sharing the words of this, and they're kind of and comments of feeling the notion of this. And really what Rabbi Joachim Prince does is sets us in a time and a place that is uncomfortable, but also tells us there is truth to what is going on that can get us out of the uncomfortable feelings. Now, here we are today and we're still uncomfortable, but there is still
Yeah.
truth in his words that can move us into the future of what actions we can do.
Wow, I love that. And you're taking something that's so familiar to people and kind of giving it new meaning and new ways to think about it. And, I've actually thought about this since I heard this several times since then. Like every time you hear this familiar things, I'm like reminded of that again. So, what a gift to give people. You spend a large part at the end of your sermon kind of listing and expanding on the people and the issues that you won't stay silent on. And you do this for quite a while. So you talk about women's health and trans rights and LGBTQ plus inclusion and gun violence, book bans, racism, immigration, the prison system, climate crisis, healthcare, economic inequality, and poverty. Like you get into it, you cover it all. And then you end that whole section saying, I will not keep silent because that's not the best we can do.
Mm.
And I really love this moment. And I'm, curious as a preacher, sometimes I think we have a tendency to speak in the abstract, to point to some vague issue over there in the corner and let people do the work. But you really don't do that. You're very specific here. So, why did you think it was necessary to be so specific about injustice rather than just speaking about it in the abstract?
It goes back to that pastoral care piece. This is what I was hearing from many of my congregation of what they were feeling. These were the exact worries and fears. And so it was necessary for me, I felt, to name their hurts and pains and concerns that they were having. But it also, in naming it, it allowed them to chime in and saying, I refuse to be silent as well on these exact topics, that these are the things that are going on in our congregation, in our country, in our world, in our state, and just in our city. And so how can I hear this and also participate in saying that I won't be silent, that I will speak out, that I will protest, that I will actually be an advocate, that I will be a follower of Christ and make sure that I am there for those in the midst of crisis, whether it's climate, whether it's trans rights, whether it's LGBTQI rights, whether it is women's rights, is race, going against racism, all of these things that are being named. And part of that, my favorite theologian is Heschel. I think Joshua Abraham Heschel. He's the best, and I'd say that in almost all my sermons, there's a piece of Heschel. But one of his quotes is that indifference to evil is worse than evil itself, and that in a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. And this piece of the sermon for me is a moment to explain that we are all responsible. That while I might be saying, as your pastor, what I won't keep silent about, I hope there are injustices that you yourself would choose not to be silent about, because that's not the best we can do, right? There's so much we can do as children of God, and walking into faith and walking into courage. And so yeah. And there are moments when we need to do the abstract. I do agree. But for this one, it just felt right, naming the things, the hurts and the fears of my congregation.
It felt very pastoral too, because by kind of expanding, there's moments in there where people are going to be able to connect, like, "Ooh, this hits close, this is personal to me." But obviously
Yeah.
not everything in there is going to feel that way. So it's offering comfort to people who feel like they are not being seen, and also calling them into greater responsibility. So what a way to do both.
Thank you.
So one of the things that we ask everyone is, what are you most proud of in this sermon?
I would say the way that my congregation received it. And, there are moments even to today that I don't remember half of my sermons. Moments today that the congregants still come up to me and say, "We're not going to keep silent. We're going to keep moving
Mm.
forward for all of these rights. We're going to keep moving forward against these injustices. We're going to keep moving forward and doing this." And, in just the remembering of this sermon and being part of that. And so for me, it felt that it wasn't just a listening exercise for them, but actually an action item that they were going to take place and do. And so that really has made me really feel good about this, but also just knowing how the Spirit is moving in the congregation around this.
I know we talked to a pastor the other day, and I'm thinking about like the timelessness of some of the messages we preach, where not
Mm,
everyone is going to be, not every message is going to reverberate, but this one, it seems like, is maybe just as or more relevant today than it maybe was when he preached. And so it's cool to see the way that this is like growing over time, and I wonder if people in your congregation maybe feel that too.
yeah, yeah, that's a word. Yeah.
Yeah, we often eh, eh, we hear again and again this idea of shared language, right? We're giving people language. And
Mhm.
when that language takes hold, where they can say, we're not going to be silent, we're not going to be silent. I mean, that that task of preaching feels like, oh, we've done something here where some phrase or something has grabbed onto what we're about, what we value, what we're taking really seriously about Christ and our work in the world, and you see it reflected in your people. What a gift that is. Uh,
Yeah.
okay, here's the other side of that question. If you could redo something, do something differently in this sermon, is there anything you would change?
So if I could go, one piece is that I was so nervous preaching this sermon. I don't know exactly why. I mean, I'm always nervous when I get up. But this one, you could tell I sway a lot when I'm nervous, and so I was just swaying in this sermon, uh, trying to get it out. And it wasn't that I was afraid of what people would hear, or how they would receive it. I think it was more that it was just such a um, heavy to share for what we're going to and through together as Christian people, or just as people. There's some points where I would have moved more of that kind of ending of our time of 2025, made it a little bit more up closer and relevant in as I was moving through the times of things, because I waited to the end to really just get a lot at. And so I wish I would have set us up just a little bit better for that.
I'm a fellow swayer when nervous, and I still have nightmares about my first preaching class, and they record the sermon and then we watch it back, and my professor put it on like 10 times speed and you watch me go like this. Uh, uh, still hurts.
Well, here's the big one. Why do you think preaching matters today?
I had a classmate that once said that sometimes you need to educate people and sometimes you need to liberate people. And through our preaching, it was in our one of our preaching courses. And I think preaching does that at times, but I think it does a multitude of other things that we don't realize what it does. And that for so many people coming on a Sunday morning, whether they are sitting in the pews, whether it's live stream or whether they're listening to it during the week on their drive because they couldn't make it, whatever it is, preaching does something that really is not just so heady, but also lives within the body. Um, Part of my preaching is that when I look at what to preach on, I believe that we should be preaching with the hands, the head, and the heart. And so I try to help each Sunday. One Sunday's the head, one Sunday's the hands, one Sunday's the heart. And looking into that and how what is it that our preaching is doing for our congregation, but also to the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news. William McClendon says that when you take the story of God and the story of you and it comes together, that too is gospel, that too is good news. And so how are we living out this good news? Part of that is through our preaching, but part of that is after the preaching is done, the service that we live into afterwards. And so why it matters, because it helps change lives. Why it matters is because it liberates people, it educates people, it brings in love, it brings in hope, it brings in truth and courage, it breathes such a spirit of the living God, and that we need it. We need, in the midst of all of our week and all of our days, in the midst of news headlines, in the midst of despair, in the midst of crying out, we need a word that is going to bridge hope. Lastly, and then I'll shut up. My wife, every Sunday morning tells me, don't say anything crazy, mostly don't curse in the pulpit. Keep it short and preach hope. And at the end of the day, what we really need is hope. And so there's something so powerful in the living word and this sacred word that we're sharing that breathes hope into the lives of people to keep on moving, to keep on going, and to keep on living in the truth and knowledge of our God.
I love that. I think I'm going to get a sticker that says, keep it short, don't curse, and bring hope.
I love it.
That's a t-shirt, right?
That's the new motto.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Thank y'all for having me. This means so much to get to share with you all. And thank y'all for the amazing work that you all are doing and sharing with so many people. Just thank you.
Thanks for listening to our conversation with Reverend Dr. Timothy Peoples. If you want to keep up with Timothy, his work, or listen to his full sermon, check out the links in our show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and follow us on whatever platform you get your podcasts on, and share with your friends. You can keep up with all things Preacher Handshake on our Instagram @PreacherHandshake, or email us your questions or preacher recommendations to preacherhandshake@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.